In February 2026, a coordinated U.S.-Israeli military campaign codenamed Operation Epic Fury struck deep into Iran's territory. Among the targets was Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the strikes. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, Iran's primary military branch, responded immediately. They declared the Strait of Hormuz completely sealed off to all commercial maritime traffic. That declaration instantly trapped 20.9 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum liquids inside the Persian Gulf every single day. To put that math in perspective, that single geographic bottleneck freezing shut removed 1/5 of the entire world's daily petroleum consumption from the market overnight. 73 years prior to this blockade, Western intelligence agencies engineered a violent coup d'etat within Iran's borders. Their explicit, documented objective in 1953 was to ensure permanent Western access to Middle Eastern oil reserves. The intelligence operation designed to permanently secure the oil supply is the exact historical catalyst that ultimately birthed the geopolitical reality capable of severing that same supply in 2026. To understand how the 2026 global energy market collapsed, we have to look at the mechanics of that 1953 intervention and the unyielding physical geography of the Hormuz chokepoint. The origins of the crisis trace back to 1951, when Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the country's oil industry. This legal maneuver completely expelled the British Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, terminating their monopoly over Iranian resources. The physical scale of the seized assets was immense, anchored by massive infrastructure projects like the Abadan refinery, which at the time was the largest oil refinery in the world. In response, the CIA and the British Secret Intelligence Service, the SIS, launched a joint covert operation codenamed Operation Ajax, led in part by CIA operative Donald Wilbur. On the ground, intelligence officers systematically dismantled the Iranian government by manufacturing street protests, planting propaganda in local media, and mobilizing anti-Mossadegh military factions. The operation succeeded. Mossadegh was overthrown in August 1953, and the pro-Western Shah was installed to reliably manage the flow of petroleum. For decades after, both governments worked to conceal their involvement. In 1978, the UK Foreign Office initiated a sustained pressure campaign against the US State Department to keep the details classified. They specifically targeted the upcoming publication of the Foreign Relations of the United States, or FRUS, which is the official documentary historical record of major US foreign policy decisions. Declassified memos revealed the UK's explicit fear that publishing very embarrassing things about the British regarding the coup would actively destabilize the Shah's ruling regime. Western intelligence successfully secured the short-term oil supply, but the mechanism they used destroyed Iran's democratic institutions. That exact intervention laid the groundwork for the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which installed a fiercely anti-Western government. By early 2026, decades of hostility reached a breaking point following the collapse of nuclear negotiations in Geneva and a volatile 12-day air conflict. That instability culminated on February 28th, when the United States and Israel launched the coordinated military strikes of Operation Epic Fury. Iran immediately executed a retaliatory matrix, launching wide-scale missile barrages against U.S. military installations across the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain. They then turned to the maritime domain. The IRGC formally prohibited all commercial vessels from traversing the Strait of Hormuz. The prohibition was physically enforced through a barrage of remote sea drone strikes and missile attacks directed at international commercial shipping. Initial targets included a Greek-owned oil tanker and a Malta-flagged container ship, both struck by projectiles while navigating the Gulf. The global shipping insurance market reacted instantly. War risk premiums for vessels attempting the straits spiked to 0.4% of the ship's total insured value per transit. For very large crude carriers, the massive VLCCs that transport the bulk of global oil, that premium increase added $250,000 in sudden, unrecoverable costs to a single transit. Confronted with active missile strikes and financially ruinous insurance rates, commercial traffic through the strait dropped to zero. A localized military escalation inside a geographic bottleneck had successfully frozen a global supply chain. Before the crisis, the Strait of Hormuz facilitated the movement of 20.9 million barrels of oil per day. It also served as the transit point for 11.4 billion cubic feet per day of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, primarily originating from Qatar. This 3D map shows the scale of that transit volume. A common assumption among market analysts was that overland pipeline routes could bypass the strait and mitigate the impact of a maritime blockade. Looking at the alternatives, Saudi Aramco's East-West pipeline offers the largest bypass option to the Red Sea. The secondary option is the United Arab Emirates Abu Dhabi pipeline, which bypasses the strait by terminating at the Gulf of Oman. However, operating at absolute maximum capacity, those two pipelines can only move a combined 4.7 million barrels per day. Iran possesses its own bypass infrastructure, the Ghor-e-Jask pipeline, but its capacity is a negligible 0.3 million barrels per day. When you subtract all available overland capacity from the daily demand, you are still left with 16.2 million barrels of oil physically stranded inside the Persian Gulf every 24 hours. Even the oil that successfully bypasses the strait via the Saudi pipeline must then navigate the Red Sea, an area where Houthi militia attacks had already cut transit capacity in half over the previous 2 years. The mathematics are absolute. The Strait of Hormuz is an unbreakable physical bottleneck. When it closes, the global energy market does not reroute, it stops. That sudden mathematical deficit rapidly transmitted through the global economy. By the second week of March 2026, gasoline prices in California exceeded $5 per gallon. In Europe, natural gas prices surged by up to 45% as Qatari LNG production ground to a halt. On the broader commodity markets, the price of crude oil spiked, easily breaking the $100 per barrel threshold. The deepest impact landed on Asian economies. The blockade effectively isolated the 89% of Hormuz crude and condensate that was destined for markets in China, India, and Japan. The architects of Operation Ajax operated on a fundamental assumption that Western powers could surgically remove a foreign leader and control Middle Eastern resources without triggering long-term systemic consequences. The 2026 crisis disproved that assumption entirely. The modern global economy is far too intertwined with highly vulnerable geographic choke points to survive localized warfare. The 73 years between the overthrow of Mossadegh and the sealing of the strait functioned as a period of geopolitical debt maturation. The initial 1953 covert investment yielded a catastrophic systemic failure. Western governments successfully redacted the paperwork of the 1953 coup for decades, but the physical and economic reality of 2026 cannot be classified, and it cannot be hidden.